I just wanted to share with you something that has been on my mind, and it has to do with the digital world and how it influences us, how it's shaped us, how it's shaped our brains and our psychology. And I'm concerned. I'm really concerned. I've looked at data about how AI affects our brains. I am currently reading a book that talks about how the digital world has affected our brains. Now this is a great book written by a neuroscientist. It's called Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital World. The author describes what has been happening to our brains ever since the introduction of the digital world. Our lives are becoming more and more entrenched in this digital world, and it is having negative effects on the brain. And ever since ChatGPT was introduced, OpenAI was introduced to the public, I've sensed and I've seen this insidious creep. It's scary. It's scary to me as a brain specialist, as a neurologist, because I see that we are becoming more and more reliant on AI. And yes, AI is starting to take away jobs, and I expect to see that more and more as the next couple of years progress. But what I'm talking about is not that. This is, in my opinion, even more dangerous. How the digital world, especially AI, carries the risk of contributing to cognitive decline and increasing mental health disorders. Now, this is my hypothesis based on the literature that I am reading, based on this book that I am reading. I think that ChatGPT is taking away our ability to think, our ability to formulate language, our ability to connect with one another. And this is very, very dangerous. And the reason why I'm making this video is because I want to bring awareness to this before it becomes so entrenched that it does massive damage. The introduction of AI to the massive public and chatbots is relatively new. And obviously we don't have a heck of a lot of data about how AI has influenced or is influencing our brains. There is some literature that I'm going to talk about in this video. And some critics of my video are going to say, well, there's not enough data. There's not enough evidence to support that this, reliance or use of AI is detrimental to the brain and our cognition. I have a problem with those sorts of arguments because when we introduce something that can potentially be harmful, like, let's say, medications, in order for a medication to be FDA approved, to be placed in guidelines for treatment of a disease, it needs to go through massive testing in order to be not only proven to be effective, but also to be proven to be safe. And what is happening now with these technologies that are very powerful technologies that have never been released or been used before their release is that they are being released without any testing, without any sort of evidence that they are safe for the human psyche, the human brain, and the human body. And the release of these technologies is largely driven by a small population, the technocracy, and they are basically making decisions based on the desire for profit, making decisions for entire populations, and not only the adult populations, but children, when there is potential for massive negative consequences. So what I'm going to talk about today is what I read about how the digital world has negatively affected our brains and our cognition, our ability to think. I'm going to talk about some recent literature about how ChatGPT use and reliance is linked to negative cognitive consequences. At the end of this video, I'll discuss actions that we can take to mitigate the risks of the increasingly encroaching digital world and AI into our lives, our brains, our children, and our autonomy. So I'm going to talk first about this book called Reader Come Home. The author discusses how the transition from reading physical books to digital content in the form of digital articles or even videos has changed the way our brains work in a detrimental way, so that it has basically led to decreased ability for critical thinking and empathy. So the author talks about how important it is for us to read physical books, because the reading of physical books activates neural networks in the brain that promote prolonged focus, prolonged attention, and memory formation, as well as networks in the brain involved in empathy, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. So she defines the act of being immersed in the prolonged reading of physical books, deep reading, or deep reading skills. And these deep reading skills, she argues, are necessary to develop in early childhood and also to continue to cultivate into adulthood in order to maintain cognitive skills, to prevent cognitive decline, to maintain and cultivate critical thinking skills, and ultimately to uphold and maintain a democracy, because we need the population of a country. In order to maintain a democracy, we need the ability to critically think. We need the ability to empathize with one another and put ourselves in other people's shoes. And she argues that deep reading of physical books activates those neural networks that allow for that. Increasing reliance on the digital world has decreased the activity of the neural networks and the strengthening of those neural networks that are required for those skills, like empathy building and critical thinking skills. I'm gonna read some of my notes here. I hope you don't mind. So the author of this book talks about what happens to our brains as we increasingly read and rely on digital mediums, where our attention is constantly divided and our minds are flooded and overstimulated with too much information. We are reading less books, less physical books, and this has led to an obvious decline in our attention span. For instance, a study reported that the average memory span of the adult has diminished by more than 50% over the last decade. So when the study was published, 10 years prior, the average memory span was 10 minutes. And when the study was published, it was about 5 minutes. So the author further describes that these days we are reading just as many words as we have in the past, but in bite-sized bursts with a number of switches in attention, from one digital medium to the next, from one device to another. This is very different from the slow, sustained attention method of reading a physical book. Online digital reading promotes rapid task switching, which is basically switching your attention from one stimulus to a next. Because you have so many stimuli, you have to rapidly switch your attention. And so digital reading promotes rapid task switching, high levels of stimulation, and a low level threshold of boredom. We do not see or hear with the same quality of attention because we see and hear too much, become habituated, and then seek still more. And this is because of something called novelty bias. We as humans are naturally attracted to novel things, to new things, the new and shiny object, because evolutionarily that's been advantageous. But now with the introduction of phones and so much novelty, it really overloads our brain and leads to habituation, and you want more and more novel stimuli at a faster and faster rate. It essentially leads to addiction tendencies. She writes also that there are unforeseen costs at younger ages. She writes that excessive screen time for children decreases boredom thresholds, which you can see when you take away devices from children who have excessive screen time use. They throw awful tantrums. Excessive screen time use decreases the attention span and thus induces an environmentally induced attention deficit. The longer that parents rely on these devices, the more dependent they become on them. This is really scary for our young population. Excessive screen time in children leads to overdevelopment of the visual networks in the brain and underdevelopment of other networks, such as the language networks, the social, the emotional limbic networks, the frontal lobe, the attention networks. So really, really bad. And this is why the American Academy of Pediatrics made official guideline recommendations that children under the age of 18 months to 2 years old should not have any screen time, because this is such an important part of brain development. And I'm not trying to be judgmental here. I know that it's really hard in this world for kids not to have a little bit of screen time so that parents can have a break. I'm not judging in any way, because I totally get it. It's really hard to be a parent these days because we don't have that much support. My intent is to just provide you with this information so that it could potentially be helpful for you. Okay, moving on. The lack of deep reading results in stunted growth of the neural networks required for critical thinking, for really pondering the writings of an author rather than just absorbing the facts and moving on. Higher level educators are concerned about this, and they see the effects of lack of deep reading in their students, who, rather than using information to deepen their knowledge and ask more questions to build upon that knowledge, they simply skim their assignments and process the information as rapidly as possible. What results is a lack of cultivation of critical thinking, which is required for true keepers of knowledge. Time out. I'll be back. Have to go and tend to some things. Sorry about that, guys. I have to hide in the basement to finish this video. Summertime is quite chaotic for families with children. Okay. Where were we? The author also states that reading digital content results in less grasping or memory of the sequencing of events, of what one has read, as well as decreased memory of the detail changes in the text. She cites a study in which 2 groups of students were given the task to read a French novel. One group read the physical copy of the book, and the other group read a digital copy. The group that read the physical copy had better memory of the sequence or the chronological order of the events. This is because there is a sensory dimension to what we read. When we have a physical book in our hands, we could feel it. It activates the sensory and the visual spatial pathways in our brain. This in turn allows us to better understand and remember the chronology, the time and space and progression of the events that we read. This act of deeply reading physical books also leads the way to better grasping of the big picture. Wolf quotes a Harvard physicist, John Huth, from his essay, Losing Our Way in the World. He said, "Sadly, we often atomize knowledge into pieces that don't have a home in a larger conceptual framework. When this happens, we surrender meaning to guardians of knowledge and it loses its personal value." So all of this reminds me of the findings from a recent study that measured brainwave activity in people who were tasked to write essays using ChatGPT, a search engine, or no external resources, so brain only. The brain only group more strongly activated specific neural networks. So you see here all of these red lines in the brain only group. So these are the strong, significant connectivities between nodes in the brain. This means that there's a lot of brain activity happening between the 2 nodes on each red line. If you look at the ChatGPT group, you don't see many strong connectivities. Pretty concerning. And this happened across numerous different frequency ranges. Another thing that I noticed, there were numerous nodes in the left hemisphere that converged onto just several key nodes in the right hemisphere region. This makes me think of hemispheric lateralization of the brain. For any medical professionals out there, I understand that there is more nuance to this. The right and the left hemisphere of the brain are lateralized in their function. The left hemisphere is attuned to paying attention to details, reductionistic thinking, evidence. The right hemisphere is involved in visuospatial processing, so understanding space and time, and also providing big picture understanding and therefore meaning and context to whatever someone is reading or whatever situation someone is in. So what I gather from this, the brain only group were forced to recall key details from their left hemisphere, send that data over to the right hemisphere in order to create a big picture idea of how they wanted to structure their argument. They were activating the networks required to make meaning. The ChatGPT group did not activate these networks. Very concerning for people who are using ChatGPT to write their essays, to write their emails, to write everything. You're not activating those networks that are required to recall memories, to recall details, and you're not activating the networks that help you assign meaning to what you are doing. When you don't activate those networks, you are losing those networks because the brain is like a muscle. You don't use them, you lose them. So the same applies with deep reading skills, especially of deep reading of physical books. We activate pathways that help us remember not only details, but also how they fit into the big picture of our thoughts. This is really important because understanding big picture gives us context. It helps us understand when and how to apply our internal knowledge to other situations, and it helps provide us with a sense of meaning in the world around us. Socrates worried that written word would decrease our capacity to remember. In those times, our knowledge was passed to one another verbally, and our memory muscles were primed to a T. He had a good point because we do outsource our memories to some extent to written word. Now that digital content has been introduced, not only have we further outsourced our memory, we've also been losing our ability for sustained attention, something that is required in order to form our memories in the first place. And now, with the introduction of ChatGPT, we are outsourcing even more cognitive skills, guys, especially our creativity skills. I hypothesize that this cognitive outsourcing has been and will continue to contribute to growing mental health disorders and cognitive disorders such as ADHD and dementia, as well as socio-political instability due to lack of cultivation of critical thinking and creative skills. These are my growing concerns as a neurologist, and I hope that more people talk about this. So how do we mitigate these risks? We need to go back to reading physical books without distractions. A lot of our power is in our individual capacity to make decisions for ourselves and our families. And the legal system, we can hope that the legal system makes changes to help support our health and our cognitive health, but we can't rely on that. I wish that the legal system made smartphones illegal for children and made AI use illegal for children, but I feel like that is a long ways away from now. So it's our job as parents to not allow our children to have access to smartphones and AI tools until the frontal lobes are developed enough in order to have the capacity to understand the implications of these devices and their consequences. We know, based on data, what social media does to adolescents and children. It destroys their childhood. It destroys their social development. It destroys their mental health. If you want to learn more about that, look at Dr. Jonathan Haidt. He's a psychologist who specializes in this research, and he's also written several books about it. The most recent book that he wrote about this topic was The Anxious Generation. What else can we do to develop cognitive skills in ourselves and in our children? Limit screen time and write. Don't use ChatGPT to write your emails. Don't use ChatGPT to write your texts. Don't use ChatGPT to write anything. It doesn't matter if your voice isn't perfect. What matters is that you are writing in your own authentic voice and exercising your neural networks that need to be exercised in order for you to maintain your cognitive skills. When you write in a journal from stream of consciousness, it really cultivates networks that organize your sense of identity. It cultivates critical thinking skills. Another thing that you could do, which I've found particularly helpful in maintaining my cognitive sharpness, is to summarize chapters of books while you read them. When I was in 11th grade, my AP English teacher used to make me do this, and I remember how hard it was at the beginning, but then I got into like a flow state of just writing after every chapter. And it not only helped me summarize what I read and helped ingrain it into my long-term memory, but it also helped me think about other ideas that built upon what I was learning. Another thing you can do is resist the temptation to allow AI to do your thinking for you. Instead, try to use AI as an information gathering source, but try to do it as intentionally as possible and to consume any information that you do find slowly, because the brain absorbs information and integrates it pretty slowly. So some of the problems that we have in our digital world is that we consume too much information at once, which does not allow us to learn and memorize that information. Last but not least, I think it's incredibly necessary that our culture begin to emphasize the importance of the humanities philosophy, of art, of classic literature. The enlightened periods of our past became so technologically advanced because of an appreciation for humanity, of the understanding of how important art and philosophy are to our existence. Thank you guys for watching, and for anybody who's still here, I appreciate you. I hope you're having a wonderful day. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts about this topic, please feel free to share in the comment section below. Take care.